Karen Whitmore adjusted her designer sunglasses and peered through the gap in her pristine white fence for what had to be the 15th time that morning. The bright yellow sold sign swaying gently in the October breeze across the street felt like a personal assault on everything she had worked to maintain in Willowbrook Estates. This wasn't just any neighborhood. This was her neighborhood, where she had served as unofficial president of the Homeowners Association for the past 8 years, where every lawn was manicured to perfection, and where property values reflected the kind of exclusivity that kept the wrong sort of people out. The moving truck had arrived at 7:30 a.m. sharp, and Karen had been watching ever since. From her kitchen window, she scrutinized every box, every piece of furniture, every person who stepped foot on what she still considered her territory. The previous owners, the Hendersons, had been perfect neighbors, quiet, wealthy, and completely compliant with her lengthy list of community standards. They had painted their shutters the exact shade of colonial blue she had suggested and never once questioned her authority when she left helpful notes about their holiday decorations being a touch too festive. But now strangers were moving in, and Karen's perfectly ordered world was about to be disrupted. She watched as a young couple emerged from a red sit-in, the woman carrying a toddler while the man directed the moving crew. Karen's lips pursed into a thin line. They looked young, too young to afford a house in Willowbrook Estates. The woman wore casual jeans and a paint-splattered sweatshirt, hardly the refined attire Karen expected from her neighbors. Worse yet, she could hear them laughing, actually laughing, as they supervised the movers. Karen couldn't remember the last time she had heard such unprofessional noise during business hours. Absolutely unacceptable, she muttered to herself, reaching for her phone to call the Homeowners Association Vice President Margaret Chen. But then she stopped. Margaret had been acting strangely distant lately, claiming she was too busy to attend Karen's emergency meetings about lawn mowing schedules and acceptable mailbox heights. Perhaps Margaret had been compromised by the same declining standards that seemed to be infecting the entire neighborhood. No, Karen realized with growing determination, she would have to handle this situation herself. By noon, she had compiled a comprehensive list of potential violations she might need to address with the new neighbors. The moving truck was parked slightly over the property line, a clear violation of city ordinances. The movers were playing music, disturbing the peace during what should be quiet hours. And most concerning of all, she could see boxes labeled Halloween decorations being carried into the house. Halloween was still 3 weeks away. The Homeowners Association guidelines clearly stated that seasonal decorations could only be displayed for 2 weeks prior to the holiday. Karen slipped on her walking shoes and grabbed her clipboard. It was time for a friendly, neighborly introduction. As she crossed the street, her mind raced with anticipation. She would establish dominance early, make it clear that Willowbrook Estates had standards, and ensure these new residents understood exactly who was in charge of maintaining the community's reputation. After all, she was doing this for everyone's benefit, especially her own property value. What Karen didn't notice was the unmarked police car that had been parked 2 blocks away since 9 a.m., or the fact that 3 different neighbors had already called the authorities about her increasingly erratic behavior over the past month. The first encounter had not gone according to Karen's carefully rehearsed plan. Instead of the grateful deference she expected, the young couple, who have introduced themselves as Marcus and Jennifer Rodriguez, had politely but firmly dismissed her helpful suggestions about proper moving procedures. Even worse, they had smiled while doing it, as if her expertise meant nothing to them. "We appreciate your concern, but we've got everything under control," Marcus had said, his tone maddeningly cheerful as he continued directing the movers. Jennifer had actually laughed when Karen mentioned the Halloween decoration policy, saying something about looking forward to decorating whenever we want to. The audacity was breathtaking. Karen spent the rest of that Tuesday afternoon pacing her living room, occasionally returning to her surveillance post by the kitchen window. The Rodriguezes were clearly going to be a problem, but she had dealt with problem neighbors before. The key was persistence and documentation. She pulled out a fresh notebook and began recording every infraction, no matter how minor. Wednesday morning brought fresh outrages. At 7:15 a.m., 15 minutes before the neighborhood quiet hours officially ended, she heard the distinct sound of a lawnmower starting up across the street. Karen rushed to her window and was horrified to see Marcus pushing an older model mower across his front yard, completely ignoring the fact that the grass was still damp with dew. Everyone knew that mowing wet grass damaged both the lawn and the mower. It was basic homeownership knowledge. By Thursday, Karen had compiled 3 pages of violations. The Rodriguezes had placed their garbage cans at the curb a full day early. They had installed a colorful wind chime on their front porch without submitting the proper modification request to the Homeowners Association. Most egregious of all, Jennifer had been seen watering her flower beds in broad daylight during peak evaporation hours, wearing what appeared to be pajama pants. Karen decided it was time for a more direct approach. Friday afternoon, while the Rodriguezes were both at work and their toddler was presumably at daycare, Karen crossed the street with her clipboard and measuring tape. She needed photographic evidence of the violations, and a closer inspection might reveal even more infractions. After all, the property was visible from the street, so technically she wasn't really trespassing. She was conducting a community standards evaluation. She started with the garbage cans, photographing their placement and measuring their distance from the curb. Then she moved to the porch, documenting the unauthorized wind chime from multiple angles. The flower beds revealed even more concerning issues. The mulch wasn't evenly distributed, and there were clear signs of overwatering. As she worked her way around to the backyard, Karen felt a thrill of vindication. Through the chain-link fence, she could see children's toys scattered across the patio, lawn furniture that clearly didn't match the neighborhood aesthetic, and what appeared to be a vegetable garden planted without proper permits. This was exactly the kind of decline in standards that would drag down everyone's property values. She was so focused on documenting the violations that she didn't hear the car pulling into the driveway until a door slammed behind her. "Excuse me, what are you doing in our yard?" Karen spun around to find Jennifer Rodriguez standing at the corner of the house, her expression no longer friendly. She was holding her phone in one hand and car keys in the other, having apparently come home early from work. "I'm conducting a community standards inspection," Karen replied, straightening her shoulders and clutching her clipboard defensively. "As a longtime resident and homeowners association representative, I have a responsibility to ensure." "You have a responsibility to stay off our property," Jennifer interrupted, her voice sharp with anger. "This is private property and you're trespassing." Karen felt her face flush with indignation. "I'm trying to help maintain the value of this neighborhood, which benefits everyone, including you. These violations," she gestured at her clipboard, "need to be addressed immediately." "The only thing that needs to be addressed is you leaving our property right now," Jennifer said, raising her phone. "I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," Karen snapped, her composure finally cracking. "They'll be very interested to hear about your numerous homeowners association violations." What neither woman knew was that 2 blocks away, Officer Rodriguez, no relation to the homeowners, was already en route, having received his 4th call about Karen Whitmore's behavior in the past 2 weeks. This time, however, they had her dead to rights. Jennifer's finger hovered over the call button when Marcus pulled into the driveway behind her car, having received her frantic text about finding that crazy neighbor lady in their backyard. He stepped out of his vehicle slowly, his expression darkening as he took in the scene, his wife standing defensively near their back gate and Karen Whitmore, clipboard in hand, standing brazenly in the middle of their private property. "Mrs. Whitmore," Marcus said, his voice carefully controlled, "you need to leave our property. Now." Karen's chin lifted defiantly. She had dealt with intimidation tactics before, and she wasn't about to be bullied by people who clearly didn't understand how civilized neighborhoods operated. "I'll leave when I've finished documenting these violations. Your vegetable garden violates at least 3 homeowners association covenants. Your patio furniture is completely inappropriate for the neighborhood aesthetic. And don't get me started on the condition of your fence line." "Our fence line?" Jennifer's voice rose an octave. "Our fence line that you're currently trespassing behind." "I'm conducting legitimate community oversight," Karen shot back, waving her clipboard like a weapon. "Someone has to maintain standards around here, and clearly you two have no intention of being responsible homeowners." Marcus stepped closer, his patience visibly wearing thin. "Lady, I don't know what your problem is, but you've been harassing us since the day we moved in. The constant staring, the notes you left on our car about our parking, the complaints you've been making to everyone in the neighborhood. It stops now." "Complaints?" Karen's eyes widened with mock innocence. "I've been trying to help you integrate properly into this community, but since you refuse to listen to reason, I'll have to take this up with the proper authorities." "The proper authorities?" Jennifer let out a bitter laugh. "You mean like the police? Because I've got news for you. They're already on their way." Karen's confidence faltered for just a moment before she rallied. "Good. They can see these violations for themselves. They'll understand that property values in Willowbrook Estates are everyone's responsibility." "Property values?" Marcus's voice carried a dangerous edge. "Let me tell you something about property values, Mrs. Whitmore. We paid fair market price for this house, same as anyone else. We have every right to live here peacefully, without some self-appointed neighborhood dictator harassing us daily." "Dictator?" Karen's face flushed crimson. "I am the elected representative of this homeowners association, and I have been maintaining the standards of this community for 8 years. 8 years of keeping people like—" She caught herself before finishing the sentence, but the implication hung heavy in the air. "People like what?" Jennifer stepped forward, her voice deadly quiet. "People like us? People who don't look like you. People who don't bow down to your ridiculous demands." "I never said anything about—" Karen started, but Marcus cut her off. "You didn't have to." We've heard all about you from the other neighbors. Mrs. Chen told us how you tried to get the Paddles Indian flag removed from their porch last summer. Mr. Johnson mentioned your concerns about the Martinez family's quinceañera decorations being too ethnic for the neighborhood. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. How dare they turn her legitimate community oversight into something ugly and divisive? She was trying to maintain standards, not. The sound of a police siren interrupted her thoughts. All three of them turned toward the street as a patrol car pulled up to the curb, followed immediately by a second unmarked vehicle. Finally, Karen muttered, smoothing down her hair and preparing to present her case to the officers. Now we'll get this sorted out properly. Officer David Rodriguez, a 10-year veteran of the Millfield Police Department, stepped out of the patrol car and surveyed the scene. He had responded to 3 previous calls about Karen Whitmore's behavior, but this was the first time they had caught her actually trespassing. Behind him, Detective Sarah Chen emerged from the unmarked car, her notebook already in hand. "Good afternoon, folks," Officer Rodriguez called out as he approached the back gate. "We received a call about a trespassing incident." Karen immediately stepped forward, her clipboard held high. "Officer, thank goodness you're here. I've been trying to explain to these people about the numerous homeowners association violations on this property, but they've been completely uncooperative. As you can see from my documentation." "Ma'am," Officer Rodriguez interrupted, his tone professional but firm, "I need you to step back toward the street, please." "But officer, I haven't finished explaining." "Mrs. Whitmore," the use of her name stopped her cold. "Step back toward the street, now." For the first time since the confrontation began, Karen felt a flicker of genuine uncertainty. The officer's tone suggested this wasn't going to unfold quite the way she had expected. Detective Chen approached the homeowners, speaking quietly to Jennifer and Marcus while Officer Rodriguez kept his attention focused on Karen. From their body language and Jennifer's animated gesturing, it was clear they had quite a story to tell. Karen clutched her clipboard tighter, her mind racing. This was just a misunderstanding. Once she explained the situation properly, once she showed them her documentation of the violations, they would understand that she was the victim here. She was the one trying to protect the community. She had no idea that Detective Chen's notebook already contained detailed reports from 4 different neighbors, 3 weeks' worth of surveillance footage from the Rodriguez family security cameras, and a very clear case for criminal trespassing charges. Karen's confidence began to crumble as she watched Detective Chen flip through page after page of her notebook, occasionally nodding at something Jennifer or Marcus said. This wasn't how encounters with law enforcement were supposed to go. In Karen's experience, police officers respected authority figures, and she was clearly the authority figure in this situation. "Officer Rodriguez," she called out, trying to regain control of the narrative. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm the Homeowners Association representative for this community, and I was simply conducting a routine inspection when—" "Mrs. Whitmore," Officer Rodriguez interrupted, turning to face her fully. "When was the last time you were on the Rodriguez property?" The question caught her off guard. "Well, today, obviously, but I was only. Before today." "When was the last time you were on their property before today?" Karen's mouth went dry. Something in the officer's tone suggested this wasn't a casual inquiry. I may have walked through their front yard once or twice to check on community standards, but, ma'am, I'm going to need you to be completely honest with me." Officer Rodriguez pulled out his own notebook. "We have reports of you being on the Rodriguez property on at least 6 separate occasions over the past 3 weeks. We also have reports of you leaving notes on their vehicle, photographing their home without permission, and harassing other neighbors about their activities." "Reports from whom?" Karen demanded, her voice rising. "Margaret Chen. I suppose she's been filling your head with lies because she's jealous of my leadership position in the association." Detective Chen looked up from her conversation with the homeowners. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Detective Sarah Chen. Margaret Chen is my aunt." The blood drained from Karen's face. Margaret's niece was a detective? That explains so much about Margaret's recent attitude, her sudden unavailability for association meetings, her reluctance to support Karen's initiatives. "Your aunt has been very helpful in our investigation." Detective Chen continued, approaching Karen with her notebook open. "Along with Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, the Patel family, and several other concerned neighbors who have been documenting your increasingly disruptive behavior." "Investigation?" Karen's voice came out as a croak. "What investigation?" Officer Rodriguez stepped closer. "Mrs. Whitmore, you're currently standing on private property without permission. That's criminal trespassing, but that's just today. We have evidence of you trespassing on this property multiple times over the past 3 weeks, along with harassment, stalking, and intimidation of multiple residents in this neighborhood." "Stalking?" Karen's clipboard tumbled from her suddenly nerveless fingers. That's ridiculous. I was maintaining community standards. I was protecting property values. By hiding in the paddle's bushes to photograph their dinner guests, Detective Chen asked, consulting her notes. By following Mrs. Johnson to the grocery store to confront her about her excessive holiday decorations, by entering the Rodriguez property at night to measure their fence. Each accusation hit Karen like a physical blow. How did they know about the fence measuring? She had been so careful, waiting until after midnight when no one would see her. And the paddle incident had been completely misunderstood. She hadn't been hiding. She had been conducting surveillance to ensure their guests weren't violating parking regulations. "You've been recording me," she whispered. Jennifer Rodriguez stepped forward, holding up her phone. 3 weeks of security camera footage, Mrs. Whitmore. Every time you came onto our property, every note you left, every time you stood in our yard taking pictures. We have it all. And it's not just the Rodriguez family," Officer Rodriguez added. "We have statements from 6 different households documenting your pattern of harassment and trespassing. The Homeowners Association, the real Homeowners Association Board, voted you out of your position 2 weeks ago after an emergency meeting." Karen staggered backward as if she'd been struck. Voted out? Impossible. The Homeowners Association was her creation, her domain. Without her oversight, the entire neighborhood would descend into chaos. "That's not. Margaret didn't have the authority," she stammered. "Actually, she did," Detective Chen said gently. "According to the association bylaws, any board member can be removed by a majority vote of the membership. The vote was 12-1, Mrs. Whitmore. Mrs. Patterson was the only holdout, and she abstained rather than vote against you." The world seemed to tilt around Karen. Even Eleanor Patterson, her closest ally, hadn't supported her. The woman who had nodded approvingly at every one of Karen's initiatives, who had praised her dedication to community standards. "We've been watching you for 2 weeks," Officer Rodriguez continued, "waiting for you to commit a clear violation that we could act on. Today you trespassed on the private property, refused to leave when asked, and were caught in the act by multiple witnesses." "But I was protecting the neighborhood," Karen whispered, her voice breaking. "Someone had to maintain standards. Someone had to keep watch. The only thing you were doing," Marcus Rodriguez said quietly, "was terrorizing your neighbors, making us feel unwelcome in our own home, making us question whether we made a mistake moving here. We almost put the house back on the market," Jennifer added. "A 3-year-old shouldn't have to ask why the mean lady keeps taking pictures of our house." The mention of their child sent a fresh wave of shock through Karen. She had never meant to frighten a child. She had been protecting children, protecting families, protecting the very foundation of civilized society. Officer Rodriguez reached for his handcuffs. "Mrs. Karen Whitmore, you're under arrest for criminal trespassing, harassment, and stalking. You have the right to remain silent." As the Miranda rights washed over her, Karen felt her carefully constructed world finally crumbling completely. Through her shock, she became dimly aware of other neighbors emerging from their homes, drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Chen stood on her porch with her arms crossed. The Paddles watched from their driveway. Even the Johnsons had come outside to witness her downfall. They were all watching. Everyone was watching. And for the first time in her life, Karen Whitmore had no control over what they saw. The Millfield County Courthouse had never felt so intimidating to Karen as it did on that gray November morning, 6 weeks after her arrest. She sat rigidly in the defendant's chair, her court-appointed attorney whispering last-minute advice that she barely heard over the rushing sound in her ears. Behind her, she could feel the presence of what seemed like half of Willowbrook Estates filling the gallery. Neighbors she had once considered her subjects, now serving as witnesses to her final humiliation. The viral video had changed everything. Officer Rodriguez of body camera footage had captured every excruciating moment of her arrest, from her indignant proclamations about community standards to her complete breakdown when she realized the scope of the investigation against her. Someone, she suspected it was that Martinez teenager, had obtained the footage through a Freedom of Information request and posted it on social media with the caption, "HO Karen gets ONG by police. You won't be live what happens next." Within 48 hours, the video had been viewed over 2 million times. Karen's face, contorted with rage and disbelief as the handcuffs clicked into place, had become a meme. Social media was filled with screenshots of her clutching her clipboard like a shield, accompanied by captions mocking her delusions of authority. The local news had picked up the story, then the regional stations, and finally national media outlets had run segments about the HO Karen who terrorized an entire neighborhood. Her employer, Millfield Community Bank, had terminated her after 23 years of service. Her sister in Phoenix had stopped returning her calls. Even her hairdresser had suddenly become fully booked whenever Karen tried to schedule an appointment. "The defendant will rise," Judge Martinez announced, and Karen's legs nearly buckled as she stood to hear her fate. The past 6 weeks had been a masterclass in legal reality. Her initial confidence that any reasonable judge would understand her position had evaporated during her first meeting with her attorney, who had bluntly explained that she was facing serious criminal charges with overwhelming evidence against her. The prosecution had presented security footage, witness statements, photographs of her documentation activities, and testimony from 8 different neighbors about her escalating pattern of harassment. Her attorney had urged her to accept a plea deal, but Karen's pride had initially refused to admit wrongdoing. It wasn't until she watched the body camera footage in the prosecutor's office, seeing herself through objective eyes for the first time, as she began to understand how completely she had lost touch with reality. Mrs. Whitmore, Judge Martinez continued, his voice carrying the weight of authority that Karen had once believed she possessed, "You have pleaded guilty to criminal trespassing, harassment, and stalking. These are serious charges that reflect a pattern of behavior that terrorized multiple families in your neighborhood." Karen's hands trembled as she gripped the defendant's table. Through her peripheral vision, she could see Jennifer Rodriguez in the front row, holding her husband's hand while their 3-year-old sat quietly between them. The same child Karen had traumatized with her late-night surveillance activities. "The court has reviewed your case extensively," the judge continued. "While you have no prior criminal record, the systematic nature of your harassment, your complete lack of remorse until confronted with overwhelming evidence, and the impact of your actions on multiple families, including young children, cannot be overlooked." The prosecutor stood and addressed the court, detailing how Karen's behavior had forced the Rodriguez family to install additional security measures, caused Mrs. Patel to develop anxiety that required medication, and led 3 different families to consider moving away from their own homes to escape her harassment. "Your Honor," the prosecutor concluded, the defendant's actions went far beyond simple neighborly disputes. This was a calculated campaign of intimidation and surveillance that created a climate of fear throughout an entire residential community. When Karen's attorney finally stood to speak on her behalf, his words felt hollow even to her own ears. He spoke of her years of community service, her dedication to maintaining neighborhood standards, her recent psychological evaluation showing she was suffering from anxiety and control issues stemming from her divorce 3 years earlier. Judge Martinez listened impassively before delivering his sentence: 18 months probation, 200 hours of community service, mandatory psychological counseling, a restraining order preventing her from contacting any of the affected families, and permanent removal from any homeowners association activities. Additionally, she was ordered to pay restitution for the security systems the Rodriguez family had been forced to install. "Mrs. Whitmore," the judge said, looking directly at her for the first time, "your actions have shown a fundamental misunderstanding of your place in your community. You were not elected as a neighborhood dictator. You were not granted authority to surveil and harass your neighbors. You certainly were not given permission to trespass on private property in service of your personal agenda." As the gavel fell, Karen felt the last vestiges of her old life crumble away. The woman who had once believed herself the guardian of Willowbrook Estates was now just another defendant heading home with a criminal record and a reputation in ruins. Outside the courthouse, local news crews waited with cameras rolling. Karen pulled her coat over her head and hurried toward her car, but she could still hear the reporter's voice carrying across the parking lot. The woman known online as Hoa Karen was sentenced today for harassing her neighbors in what prosecutors called a systematic campaign of intimidation. As she drove home through neighborhoods where she had once felt like royalty, Karen realized that justice had indeed been served. Not the justice she had imagined herself dispensing from behind her clipboard and measuring tape, but real justice, the kind that protected innocent families from people exactly like the person she had become. The for sale sign went up in her front yard 2 weeks later. Karen Whitmore was finally leaving Willowbrook Estates, but not as the community guardian she had imagined herself to be. She was leaving as a cautionary tale about what happens when someone confuses control with authority and surveillance with service. The neighborhood, she got to admit in her quieter moments, was probably better off without her.